Welcome to Data Science Perspectives. This series focuses on analytics and data science professionals from across industry to learn about how their career unfolded, what skills they look for when hiring, and what trends they think are coming next. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Let's get to it. Welcome to this episode of Data Science Perspectives. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Today I've got my second best of episode featuring the question, what's one thing you wish that someone had told you before you started working? I got a lot of great answers to this, as you can see on the screen, where I've summarized them. And I think whether you're new in your career or you've been around a while, you'll get a lot of benefit from listening to what these folks have to say. I've once again provided the exact timings of each executive I spoke to, so if you'd like to hop to any given one of them, you can do that. And with that, let's get into the show. Russ Pierce, Vice President, Intercontinental Hotels Group. What's one thing that over the years you've come to wish someone had told you before you started working a real job?
For me, I think the most important thing it took time for me to learn was that people don't want to see your homework. If you start with the approach, you're going to typically lose people that aren't interested in the approach. Usually as an analyst, you're not talking to other analysts, you're talking to a stakeholder who wants the answer. And for us to start with the answer and why it matters, and then really only show how we got there if they're curious and want to understand better, or frankly, want to test your credibility. That's usually the dynamic, right? Is that they want to know what the answer is and say, okay, prove to me. How can you show that that's the truth? And then you can show the approach. But as a younger analyst and as a younger engineer, I always wanted to show my work. I was very proud of my work, understandably, but recognizing you were alienating people, right? They weren't interested in that part.
Yeah, it is hard to accept that people actually don't care about all this hard work that you did. In that they do care, but in a much different way than we care. Khalifa Aljada, Director of Data Science, Home Depot. What's something that you wish someone had told you before you started working that you had to learn the hard way on the job?
If I would think about one thing, it is absolutely the storytelling and presentation skills. I wish someone really told me before getting into the data science how important is storytelling and how important is presentation skills as individual contributor and as well as a manager. So both career paths as individual contributor and as a manager in data science, storytelling is a crucial skill. And before getting to the industry, I wasn't aware of the importance of that skill. I wasn't really prepared or trained to be a good storyteller and a good presenter. But when you get into industry, that's the first thing that hits you hard, that if you don't know how to tell a story about the data, what you learned, especially in our field, because we speak different language than the business, than the software engineers, right? So we speak different language, and then you have to be a good storyteller. So that's one thing I wish someone told me before getting into the industry, to prepare myself very well in storytelling and presentation skills.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's a recurring theme. I know I would echo that from my own career, and many other people do as well. And I know at least, here at Kennesaw, we really are trying, Kennesaw State University, obviously we're trying very hard to instill some of that into our students with setting up internships, doing capstone courses with real data. But even at that, I mean, the reality is a course or two, until you really get out and experience it, it's hard to understand that importance, especially when you spend years in academic setting getting inundated with the algorithms and with the theory. Ann Robinson, Chief Strategy Officer, Kinaxis. What's one thing that you wish someone had told you before you started working that you ended up having to learn the hard way on the job?
I think I've already said it. It's those soft skills that complement your technical skills. Learn your science. You always want to understand your craft, know your math, know your analytics, know the latest, get your specialties. Don't necessarily be married to them. If you have a coding language or two in your background, great. But I wished I had learned change management before I left the PhD program. I wish I had focused more on program management skills before I had entered into the work world. Those, so-called business or maybe softer skills complemented with a rich technical, analytical background, that's really a magical combination for success. Whether you go into an industry type of organization, a consulting type of organization, a vendor type of organization, it can be pervasively applicable.
Lauren Hearns, Senior Vice President, Cardlytics.
As you look back over the years of what you've done, what's something that you wish someone had told you before you started working in the real world that you ended up having to learn the hard way instead?
Yeah, I think Ed, that's a great question. A lot of this is, and we talked about you learn from experience. Another saying that I'm not sure it's been attributed to Mark Twain. It's been attributed to Roy Rogers and a lot of different people. But the saying is, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. It's the whole idea that you're going to have to fail to learn. But I think what I would like to have known and done better early on in my career, and maybe I knew this, but I just didn't do it, is that I needed to actively manage up. Early on in my career, I thought my actions and my results, they would speak for themselves and get you noticed and promoted. And in a lot of cases they do, but they don't in every case. And I think a corollary to that is that sometimes if you make things look easy, then they're going to think that it's easy. So, that's where you have to talk about how difficult this problem was. You think about when we watch a professional athlete, either a baseball player, football player, soccer player, and they're going out there and they make things look easy. We know, because we've tried those sports, that they are not as easy as it looks. That may not be the case with data science or analytics or operations research, because there might be a misconception by the executives who think that this is something where you just have some data, you download an algorithm, and you get an answer. So I think those are the things that I wish I would have done better early on in my career, and explained what we did and how difficult it was to do what we did.
Colin Coleman, Chief Analytics Officer, Inspire Brands.
When you look back now, after having worked for a while, is there one thing that you wish someone had told you before you started working that you ended up learning the really hard way?
Many things. They say, right, that not just the mistakes. I wish I had somebody take me to one side, because when I started off going to college and starting off at NASA, I was very blinded, if you like, by what I wanted to do. Right, I was very much just focused on that, and I was surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have been, as I progressed, that that's not the way the world works. And my interests would change over time. I, as a person, will change over time. And obviously the work environment is constantly changing. So the ability to be aware of that and to always kind of come back periodically and check with, what are my interests today versus what were they 5 years ago? What's of interest to me and how to apply that. And just know that, that book about Who Moved My Cheese, the cheese is going to get constantly moved in terms of both the work environment, but also I think the surprising thing was for me. And so I think I again, going back to the advice I give the team is understanding what's of value to you, and then how to align that with the work environment. So given where I started and where I am now, it's so different. That was totally surprising to me.
I think too, the idea that you mentioned about reassessing where you are and what you want to do in points of time, because it will change. You're right about that. I can weave a story about how I went from where I started to where I am right now today. And it sounds like this cohesive, planned out story when you hear it looking back, hindsight 2020. But there were a number of the components of that story that at the time came out of nowhere, were random, weren't anticipated. I jumped at an opportunity that came my way, or I passed up an opportunity, and things evolved from there. And it, in the end, it kind of ends up making sense. But if you're not looking for those changes and you're just going straight ahead at what you wanted, you could end up in a job that is a bad fit for you, even though it was at one point a really good fit. And I don't think that's a good spot for people to get in their career.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I am surprised. And the other thing I think too is getting older, having kids and so forth, right? My objective function changes over time.
Yeah.
When I was younger, it was all about the career, right? So other things come and go about what I want. People call it the work-life balance, but it's like, but what are the other things that matter? And so how does this play into that? Am I prepared to move across country while the kids are in school, right? Do I want to spend all my time doing this at work when I want to be doing this at home? And those are hard things to answer until you're faced with it.
David Somers, Senior Vice President of Analytics, Epsilon.
So if you look back, what's one thing that you wish someone had told you before you started working, that you wish you had known that you ended up having to learn the hard way?
Yeah, I'd say the technical skills only get you so far, right? Most of the classes that I took in grad school were focused on statistical techniques and how do you build a better model. And that's important depending on what your role is within analytics. But the things that I wasn't taught and learned the hard way is all of those other skills, right? The storytelling and making it an engaging, story with what you're trying to learn and do, and listening skills, sitting in a room and really trying to figure out what's going on and how analytics can help solve some of the questions. And it's funny, I still remember the day I was at Best Buy. My mentor, who was my manager, and the CMO there, we had a big executive presentation, and he asked me to join and present something. And I was ready. I was buttoned up. I anticipated all the questions that were going to come up, and I nailed it. And I thought, great job, David. So we left, and he said, well, let's go back to my office and talk about the meeting. And I'm thinking, oh, well, this is great. I'm going to get, praise. And he asked me what happened in the meeting. And I told him I nailed this great presentation. And he's like, you weren't listening. Like, you had an opportunity to do some things, and all you cared about was getting through your content that you had already decided beforehand what they needed to hear. And I still remember that day, Bill, because in my mind, it was great. And then the more he talked about it and forced me to think about it, it was like, oh. So I learned that the hard way, and I've shared that story quite a few times with folks who I want to prevent them from learning it the hard way. And that stuck around. And I think we talk about some of the softer skills, but it's real.
Cheryl Presley, Data and Analytics, Southern Company.
What's one thing, if you
Yes.
think back, that you wish someone had told you before you started working that you learned the hard way on the job?
I think it is one of the biggest things I wish I'd known is do not seek perfection. Be okay with making mistakes and figuring out how you can correct them, and be okay with failing. I think that is a part of everyone's journey. We learn from the mistakes we make, and we learn how to do it better the next time. It is very difficult to do everything right all the time. It's not realistic. And I think it puts a lot of pressure on employees and people to feel that they have to be perfect. I think that is what we should tell students when they come out of college, that you will make mistakes. And as long as you learn from them and grow from them, you will be fine. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned. I have learned throughout my career.
Taylor Horton, Senior Director, Cox Automotive.
What's one thing that you wish someone had told you before you started working that you figured out the hard way?
Yeah, it's probably a softer answer than I wish there was something really easy. But for me, the thing that I didn't understand that I wish someone had sort of explained to me better was that business is all about working with constraints, and that to me is the biggest difference between the academic parts of my life and the business parts or the industry parts of my life, which is every problem that we face in business has some constraint on it, and the biggest thing that I think that I work on and I try to get my teams to work on is identifying those constraints so that you can properly understand the problem you're even working on. Everyone talks about the importance of elicitation and understanding the problem you're working on so that you can solve it correctly. But to me, that's all about understanding the constraints that you're under, whether that's time or cost or maybe your algorithm can't be too sophisticated because it needs to be easy to implement, or maybe your stakeholder is not very far along in the maturity curve, and so you need to do something that's easier to explain to them, maybe not from just so that they can get bought in early. So those are the types of things that I think are really important from a constraint standpoint. And all the skills that you learn in school are just sort of cliche to say the tools in the toolbox, but those are the tools in the toolbox so that once you really understand the problem and the constraints that you're under, you can apply all the hard skills that you've learned to find the best right solution for that. The best algorithm, the best approach, the best technical implementation, the best stakeholder management and soft skill approach to working with the stakeholder. So all of those things are really important, but I don't think I quite understood that. It's also cliche to say that the data is not as clean as it is when you get it in a classroom, and it's partly because I think all of those constraints that live up, and so once you enter industry or once you enter your first job, I think you'll quickly start to see what those constraints are. And so my advice would be seek out and really try to understand those constraints. Make sure that you're pushing on the people you're working with or your manager or whomever else to understand the problem really well and why you're doing something a certain way, or why the approach of your team or your company is a certain way, and those constraints will be revealed. And I think that'll give you clarity on how to better solve problems.
Eric Weber, Head of Data Products, Yelp.
What's one thing that you wish someone had told you before you started working?
So I've thought about this question a lot, and for me, it comes back to work is not just about output. Work is generally about people and interacting with people, generating relationships with people, working with them toward larger outcomes. And so it's really tempting to become incredibly technically proficient, and I think it's important. But back to our point about opportunities that come along, things that you didn't know were available, typically those are unlocked by people, not just by having technical skills or a certain component on a resume. And so that doesn't mean that you have to be this extroverted person who's meeting everyone in these rooms. Like, I'm not that, and I don't find a lot of joy in that. Yeah. But what I do try to focus on is creating good relationships with people around me, and not just at your current role, but people who are in your industry, people who care about similar things. Because at the end of the day, people hold a lot of decision-making power, and those connections that you form are really important. And so for me, it's if I went back and told myself, you're going to need to invest in people kind of from day one, I think that would have changed a lot of things. Now I believe that, and it's unlocked a lot of things for me. But certainly as a student coming out, the temptation is to look and say, I will advance by doing this project or this set of things. But often it will be the people that you work alongside that end up changing your career.
Kyer Desai, Chief Data Officer, TD Ameritrade.
When you look back now, what's one thing you wish someone had told you before you started working because you ended up, learning it the hard way?
Yeah, so I would say that knowledge is important, right? So a lot of your technical skill and other skills that you bring to the table are important. And I thought when I first started my career that was it. The person who's got the most knowledge should then, be allowed to, run groups and progress in their career. But that's the furthest thing from the truth in the corporate world, right? In the corporate world, knowledge has to translate to relationships, and relationships are the key, right? And I think investing more time in your relationships and building quality relationships around the enterprise and with your vendors and with your people, your peers, is even more vital than the knowledge that you have. So I think that's. I wish somebody had told me that up front, and I didn't learn on the job.
Eric Schmidt, Global Director of Data and Analytics, The Coca-Cola Company.
If you could think of one thing that you wish someone had told you before you started working that now is blindingly obvious to you but wasn't before you experienced it, what would that be?
So one of the things, whether you're on the business side or the IT side or wherever you're working, I would say that the thing that I've learned later on in my career, and I'm continuing to try and develop, is the ability to communicate. And I think if you're in analytics, that's probably one of the potential blind spots for you, and maybe an area where you may want to think about putting some effort into honing your skills or developing some skills. When I first came out of my PhD program, I thought I was really good at explaining technical concepts and describing these complex mathematical systems and physical systems. After all, I got a PhD in this field. But in my first business role or two, or probably even up until a few years ago, just explaining something basic like price elasticity to business stakeholders, I probably wasn't so effective at it. I probably wasn't a great communicator. And I think really where that kind of dawned on me was in my MBA program. And that was very helpful for me. So I think, and I wish I would have earlier on in my career been clued into the importance of good communication skills, presentation skills, the ability to tell stories, to be engaging, how am I presenting myself, etc. And then again, coming back to really working hard at reducing the complexity, and especially in that communication. And again, because from an analytics mindset or an analytics professional point of view, I think we all assume that everyone else just gets it at the level that we get it at, but that's not always the case. And even when you're talking to very, very smart people, if you're introducing complex ideas and you're trying to do that in a 10 or 15 minute period, there's only so much you can kind of squeeze in, even if you're talking to folks who are in the analytics community or analytics professionals. So that's the one thing I wish I would have started working on, like in my undergrad, like right away, is communication skills.